to Verdict Vantage, covering breaking news stories. Thank you for supporting our research. We would like to extend a trigger warning before we continue. Please be advised.
This video contains discussions about true crime, which may include topics such as violence, assault, and other distressing incidents. Viewer discretion is advised.
Verdict Vantage, thanks you for tuning in. Your support means the world to our channel. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and hit the subscribe button to join our amazing community. Stay in the loop on future updates by ringing the notification bell. And if you found this valuable, sharing is caring. Thanks again for being here.
State prison is now underway. We are told that the lethal injection should be administered at any minute. They will give us a 2-minute warning when they are ready to announce that that has been completed. This is Utah's first execution in 14 years. Taberon Honie was moved from an observation cell into an execution chamber just within the last half hour. Honie was sentenced to death in 1999 for the brutal murder of his ex-girlfriend's mother, Claudia Ben. His execution warrant was filed in June of this year after serving 25 years on death row. We have team coverage of everything taking place inside the prison, where Honie will have 2 minutes to have any final words before his execution, to the details and things going on outside where people have gathered to make their voices heard. But let's start with news specialist Andrew Adams. Andrew, you have been attending the hourly updates from prison correction officials. What's happening right now?
Well, this is our best understanding, Deanie, from what's been told to us. And keep in mind, we could get word at any minute that the sentence has been carried out. And so we're watching for that. But while we're waiting, let's back up a little bit and talk about what's been taking place over the last half hour. As you mentioned, Taberon Honie has been moved from his observation cell where he's been since early this morning, and he's been moved into the death chamber. From what we understand of the process from there are crews that are basically strapping him into a chair, connecting the IVs, which are run from a different room. And this could be happening just as we speak because we're not getting direct live updates from that death chamber. We'll get an indication when it has been carried out. But basically what we understand of the process is the curtains are pulled back, Honie is given the opportunity to offer some last words, and then once he has done that, there's a command given to basically execute him. Once that happens, then the drugs are pushed, the pentobarbital, and then all eyes are on an EKG machine. When there's no heartbeat, then the curtains close. His family members are then brought in to perform a spiritual ceremony, and then the medical examiner takes over before the media can come in and make its observations. So that is the process that is taking place here, perhaps as we speak and over the next few minutes as we're waiting for this execution to be carried out. But earlier in the evening, corrections officials spoke to us about just how much weight this whole entire process and the toll it has taken on the staff here at the Utah State Prison. Let's hear that right now.
The feeling is different this week. It's not something that anyone who's involved with this looks forward to or takes joy in by any means. However, we all see it as a responsibility of ours in the department, and we take it seriously, and we intend to carry it out in a caring and professional manner.
Bunch of witnesses for this execution between members of the media, government representatives, as well as representatives for the victim and for the condemned. Right now, we're in a position of waiting for an indication that that sentence has been, in fact, carried out. From what we've heard about pentobarbital used in executions, could possibly take up to 20 minutes, even if everything is administered properly. We are expected to get a little bit of a warning. So we're waiting for that right now. As soon as we hear it, we will bring it to you. Deanie.
Okay, Andrew, I can add one thing that we've seen from out here. The vans carrying what we presume are the witnesses left and went to the building behind me. That's the building where the execution is actually taking place tonight. Let's go now to the free speech zone where demonstrators showed up to protest the execution. Daniel Woodruff is there now. Daniel, how many people are actually there tonight?
Yeah, Deanie, several dozen, I would say, have showed up here, and you can see just right behind me, they have been spending the last little while sharing thoughts about the death penalty, about what's happening tonight. They've been praying and other things as they await word that the execution has been carried out. They're all here to protest the death penalty and the fact that this execution is happening. I've talked with a number of people who traveled from outside Utah to do this, but I'm also joined now by Janelle, who is from Layton, Utah. And you came out, Janelle, with a specific message. What is the message you're hoping to share tonight?
That we learn that this is not the answer. This execution is not going to deter anybody in the future, and it is a cruel punishment. I don't think this is right. And I really hope that the people of Utah do something about the laws to prevent this from happening again.
What about the family members of the victims who have some expressed a desire for this type of closure?
If that's what they feel they need, I really don't know what to say to them. I think it would have helped maybe if they could have just understood him more, understood why he did what he did. I don't know what I would do if it was a family member of mine.
Yeah, thank you, Janelle. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective here. So we're here with a number of people protesting the death penalty and the execution being carried out tonight. Deanie?
All right, Daniel, thank you. Now, there is a process that corrections officials have been preparing for and following for weeks. They leave nothing to chance, and new specialist Daniela Rivera has been looking into the policies of Utah Corrections. Walk us through some of the things that have happened today and building up to this.
Absolutely. So something we know is rehearsals are mandated in policy, at least 3 rehearsals with members of each of these teams who have been selected to help carry out this execution. There's the transport team bringing him to the chamber, the tie-down team securing him in the gurney properly. There's the IV team. Their job is to establish the IV lines, and then the executioners, it is ultimately their job to push the drugs. There's also the director of prison operations, executive director of the Department of Corrections, Brian Redd, is overseeing this process. The prison warden will be there. A physician will be there to watch his vitals and ultimately certify his death. So we know these rehearsals have been going on up until this evening was the 7th rehearsal that they carried out. 4 more than mandated by policy. Department of Corrections telling us they want to make sure they've planned for every type of scenario.
In fact, I found it interesting, the detail was that they wanted to get a stand-in, an employee who was the size of Honie so they could practice.
They did. They had someone stand in who was a similar height and weight to practice with these rehearsals. It's something that's been happening here in the weeks leading up to this, and as we now know, multiple times even today.
Okay. Daniela, we'll be checking back with you and get some more details in just a second, but we have all night wanted to make sure that we pay proper tribute to the life that's already been lost, the victim in all of this, which is Claudia Ben. KSL investigator Courtney Johns took a look at her legacy and the impact that she has left behind.
Claudia Ben's family has shied away from really any media coverage, but her family did speak at Taberon Honie's commutation hearing last month, sharing stories about the woman she was.
My aunt just wanted to help.
A sense of service is something loved ones say was always a part of Claudia Marie Ben's life.
Claudia Ben had many titles. Number 1 was being a mother.
Born on June 19, 1949, according to her obituary, Claudia grew up in Page, Arizona, got married in 1969, had 3 daughters before later divorcing, and then pursuing her college degree in the 80s. She got her associate's degree at Southern Utah State College in Cedar City and transferred to the University of Utah, majoring in sociology, during which she worked at the Women's Resource Center, helping other women further their education.
She was a mover and shaker, and was a leader.
Claudia was a substance abuse counselor for the Paiute Indian tribe of Utah, the vice chairwoman of the Shivwits Band of Paiutes, and the biggest fan of Tina Turner.
And now they're together up there, and she's rocking out up there in the high above heavens, you know?
But her greatest love was for her family.
She provided for me, taught me right from wrong.
Taking in loved ones when they needed a place to stay, she was a rock and a teacher to all.
She taught me to be proud of who I am and where I come from.
Lessons they will never forget.
And to always know my worth.
Coupled with memories that must now last a lifetime.
We had an Auntie and niece day for my 18th birthday.
As they dream of the life that could have been led.
If she was here, she would have been the best grandma ever, because she's the best woman.
The night Claudia was killed, she was babysitting her 3 grandchildren. Honie went into Claudia's home because Claudia was helping her daughter by letting her stay there. Back to you.
Courtney, thank you. Let's go back to the protest site. Debbie Worthen has talked to someone who is there who felt it was important that they take part in those demonstrations tonight. Debbie?
Right, Deanie, and what's really interesting here tonight is generally when we talk about a protest or a rally, it's loud, it's yelling, people are really rallying up the crowd. That is not the case here tonight. It is a very somber group here tonight. I'm with one man who came in from Ohio. He knows the Gardner family, and he has a personal tie to these types of situations in general. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tell me why you felt like it was important to come out.
Because I believe that all life is precious. You know, no matter what you do. They had that gentleman incarcerated for 25 years, and I can't see why they couldn't have continued to incarcerate him. So it's like he's done 2 sentences. He's done a life sentence, and then they've turned around and executed him.
Your brother was on death row. Talk about that.
My brother was the face of the Violent Crime Bill 1994 when President Clinton came into Ohio. My brother was arrested. Here we're talking 32 years later, no evidence, no information, nothing whatsoever. And I've noticed that as I've gone throughout the United States, there are some that are guilty, but there's a vast majority of these guys that have innocent claims, and those innocent claims are not being heard, they're actually being executed. And we're talking, Minnesota, Mississippi, Tennessee, Texas, Oklahoma. I've been to all these states and I've seen some stuff.
Ultimately, what would you like to see nationwide?
Nationwide, I'd like to see our country come together and show some love and stop killing one another. When I go to every church I go to, it says thou shalt not kill, and it shows a picture of Jesus Christ up here on a cross, and yet we still come out and kill. And I just...
He has been with about 4 dozen protesters here tonight out near the Utah State Prison in this free speech zone. Deanie, back to you.
All right, Debbie, thank you. If you've been watching this broadcast on KSL TV, we are going to send you back to Olympic programming after a break. We are going to continue our coverage of the execution on our digital app, KSL Plus app, and you can continue to watch the coverage from there. We are now looking at about just 11 minutes after midnight and awaiting word that the execution has been carried out. We expect that to come any minute, but in the meantime, Daniela, we have been talking about there were last-minute pleas for leniency, trying to delay it even further, appealing to the governor even. A lot of those revolved around the drugs being used tonight. Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So Utah law calls for a drug, sodium thiopental, to be used for executions, which is not available. It's not something the Department of Corrections could attain. And so the Department of Corrections began creating their own combination of drugs they thought would be an effective alternative. That was ketamine. That was potassium chloride, a 3-drug combo, fentanyl, a pain reliever. However, they knew that would get tied up in the courts. That was the subject of the litigation, Mr. Honie's lawsuit leading up to this point. He said that never tested combo, ketamine, has never been used in an execution. He said that could amount to cruel and unusual punishment. His attorneys actually pointed to the drug pentobarbital, which has been used in many executions, but is very hard to get.
And expensive.
And expensive, as we've learned. The Department of Corrections, as it turns out, was able to secure 3 doses of pentobarbital for a hefty price tag for taxpayers, $200,000 for those 3 doses. One is intended for Honie. There are 2 backup doses as well, present here to carry out this lethal injection tonight. And we understand that their plans were shortly after midnight to give Honie his opportunity to say his last words and then to begin to administer a fatal dose of pentobarbital.
There is a process that they go through that is down to when they open the curtains. Walk us through what happens from here, or presumably what is even happening now.
Absolutely. So once the curtains are open for witnesses, according to this policy, the IV lines would have already been established. At that point, Honie is given exactly 2 minutes to make his final statements, remarks, if he wants to, and that is a firm 2 minutes. The policy calls for them to move forward, not to allow extra time to wrap up if someone is still talking. Also, if foul language is used, the policy calls for them to move forward. And then at that point, there are certain things that must be verified. They will check that there are no last-minute legal challenges with the Attorney General. They will check that it is after midnight, and then the signal will be given to the executioners to begin to push those drugs. Now, after those have been administered, within 3 minutes, a physician will check Honie's vitals. If he is still alive, those checks will happen for every 60 seconds until the process is complete.
Not to be too morbid here, but there is also a process for what happens after he dies and passes away.
Yes. Honie has filled out a form with instructions what he would like to happen to his remains. We have learned that there will be a ceremony after he passes here. Department of Corrections officials have said they are accommodating that request, and they'll give us more information about that afterwards. And then ultimately the medical examiner will they'll take custody of his remains. And another just thing to note, people who are executed are not eligible to donate organs.
Okay. We'll stand by here.
Absolutely.
We'll keep you posted. We're awaiting any word any minute now to find out the status of that execution. But let's go back out to the free speech zone where Daniel Woodruff is. I would imagine the mood is pretty somber out there as well, Daniel.
It is really somber, Deanie. People are sitting and praying and talking with each other as they await word about what's happening at the prison just about a mile and a half down the road. And we're in the free speech zone that's been designated for people to come and share their views on any side of this issue. But the people we've met tonight have been protesting and speaking out against the death penalty. Michelle joins me. You're from here in Utah. Tell me a little bit about why you chose to come out tonight and what you hope people take away from tonight.
Honestly, I'd rather be in bed sleeping right now. I think it's pretty shady and nefarious to have state-sanctioned murder happen sometime after midnight, and the fact that this has to happen hidden, that they put this free speech zone in the middle of a field by an Amazon warehouse, it just seems very dystopian. And coming from Minnesota, where we don't have the death penalty, it felt something really distant, and now being here in a state that condones state-sanctioned murder is bizarre. It feels unreal. So I felt like I was obligated to be here and show my presence and show my opposition.
And your sign here says murder is never the solution. Clearly a horrific crime was committed that led to this sentence, and a victim and families impacted forever. But talk about, your thoughts behind this, that a death penalty is not a solution to what happened.
Purely from a financial and economic perspective, it's egregious use of state resources, of time. The state of Utah spent $200,000 to just buy the injection that's going to put this man to death, and he could be serving life in prison. It's a simple solution that to me is more difficult than just dying.
Michelle, thank you for sharing your perspective. Appreciate it. So Michelle's one of dozens who have come out tonight to voice their opinion here in this designated zone away from the prison, and they're praying and talking and just, again, waiting for word of what's happening down the street where you are, Deanie, at the Utah State Correctional Facility.
All right, Daniel, thank you. It's an important perspective tonight. Now, we have one of the witnesses that is here tonight has been intimately involved in this process. He was the prosecuting attorney from the very beginning of this terrible case. News specialist Debbie Worthen is also at the free speech zone. And Debbie, he said something powerful. He said that this is not a case where the death penalty was given, but where it was earned.
Yeah, that's right, Deanie. And Scott Burns actually stopped by this area on his way into the prison tonight. He will be one of the witnesses. He's in there now, we presume. Now, he says tonight is not about celebrating. It is somber. And really, that's what we have seen out here this evening as well. But he also says it's about finishing something that was started 25 years ago. And tonight, he grieves with the family. He says he grieves for all of the lives that Claudia Ben was never able to touch. Think after 25 years, you would forget the small details of a case.
The facts of this case were just so horrific, so egregious, so brutal.
But for prosecuting attorney Scott Burns,
I don't think anyone that has been to a crime scene like that can wash away, the memory.
In fact, for years, Burns kept a picture of Claudia Ben's granddaughter on his desk at work. And he describes Ben.
She was just a vibrant, smart, witty, funny person.
At least that's what he learned about her when he prosecuted her killer, Taberon Honie. As the execution date comes, he believes Ben would have believed Honie deserved to die.
This is the ultimate penalty for what is, the ultimate crime.
Burns says the pictures from the scene, even presented in black and white to jurors, caused two of them to pass out. That's how gruesome the crime scene was. So on this night, he says this is the punishment that fits the crime.
This was a slaughter. This was just violence, unhinged.
Now, Burns drove through here earlier tonight, and then he actually quoted what the judge told him all those years ago. He said the judge, who he really appreciated and respected, said, if ever there were a death penalty case, this is it. Deanie?
All right, Debbie, those are powerful sentiments. We appreciate that. Thank you. Let's go back inside the prison to news specialist Andrew Adams. Andrew, you have been attending the hourly updates from prison officials. We were in there a bit ago as they took the witnesses from our area. Describe what's been going on in these hours leading up.
Well, Deanie, it has been a very detailed look into the final hours of Taberon Honie, and they've really given us a detailed step-by-step aspect of Honie's day from early this morning when he was taken to his observation cell around 6 in the morning to all the meetings he's had with family. It seems like one of the bigger take-homes was just how often he was meeting with family, and there were a variety of different family members, from his daughter to his mother to his father, sisters, I believe an aunt, and those people were all filing in. They could only visit him 2 at a time, but they were all rotating through and essentially spending time with him for the entirety, or almost the entirety, of his final day here at the prison. And we even had some insight into some things that he would say to them. Like at the end, we were told that he would say, keep your heads up. Was one of the messages there at the end. We were told about tears that were shared and some of the emotions that were shared. It sounds like he even deferred talking to his attorneys till as late as possible, just so he could spend a maximum amount of time with his family. We're given insight into his last meal, which obviously we've reported multiple times, as a cheeseburger, fries, and a shake. And also just about how he's carrying about his day. He was given a tablet, but he only listened to music at the very end of the day, we were told, when finally he had time alone to himself after all those meetings throughout the day. So we have been getting hour-by-hour updates on how his life, his final remaining hours of life, and how those have been going. And of course now we're just waiting for an update on how that life ended. And again, could be coming at any minute. Back to you, Deanie.
Okay, we'll be waiting for that 2-minute warning. Andrew, thank you. You know, the prosecutor said something interesting, and I want to bring in Daniela for this. He reflected on the fact that all this time that the family had gone and that Claudia Ben had not been able to touch other people's lives. You did an interesting figure today.
Well, we did the math, and we spent a lot of time talking about the hour by hour of what's happening on this one day. But once this is carried out, it will be a measure of justice from our system, 9,526 days from the day that Claudia Ben was murdered and taken from her family, her community, from this world.
It's a long time.
Absolutely.
To wait for this day. That signals 25 years on death row. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about why this happens at 12:01. A lot of people, we've seen it on social media, and they've been asking, why not do it earlier in the day?
We did ask that of Department of Corrections officials. The death warrant was signed for August 8th. They told us the reason they decided to do it right after midnight was simply because for this to happen, there's quite a bit of security that is involved, and the place goes into a lockdown, the whole prison system. And they felt this was the time that would have the least impact on the day-to-day operations of the prison. When you think about programming, educational classes, visits from family and inmates, all of those things would have to cease in the middle of the day to carry this out.
This is the most secure way to do it, certainly, and allows them to keep this area at least secure, but still allowing employees and things like that to move freely on campus. Who is in there right now? We've got witnesses, we've got corrections officials. Describe that.
So we broke down the execution team, but there is a witness gallery. And so policy allows for 5 victim representatives and 5 people chosen by Honie. We know he chose 4 family members and 1 of his defense attorneys. We also know that the department allowed the victim representatives to have 7 people. And they did give that option to Honie. He stuck with the 5. So there are 7 victim representatives who are witnesses. witnessing. There are 5 people there for Honie. There's also government witnesses. For example, the prosecutor. Policy also allows for 2 law enforcement officers from the county where this offense occurred. It allows for an attorney general or their designee. And then there are journalists. There are 7 journalist witnesses. One of those is our KSL.com colleague, Pat Reevy, who's in there as a journalist witness. Because as our duty as journalists is to bear witness to this process, to ensure that there is transparency and accountability in the way the government carries out this enormous act of authority and power when conducting an execution on the public's behalf.
It was interesting, just as they were called to go, summoned to go do their duty, they were read a pretty strict list of instructions and requirements and things that they could and could not take into the execution.
There can be absolutely no recording devices. In fact, the paper they had to sign informed them they would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. There's actually only one audio recording, and it is of his last words. And that is simply for the written record, so that we have an accurate record of what is said, and policy calls for that to be destroyed 24 hours after the execution.
A lot of policies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's go down now to Daniel Woodruff, who is in the free speech zone. But Daniel, earlier you had a chance to dig into Utah's death row and to look at some of the other members, other inmates who are there. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, there's a number of inmates on death row still, Deanie, at this point. That number continues to dwindle over time, and we haven't seen an execution here in Utah in over 14 years. Daniela earlier just barely was talking about the important journalistic responsibility of bearing witness to an execution, and earlier I had a chance to sit down with 2 KSL journalists who witnessed the last execution in this state more than 14 years ago.
When convicted murderer Ronnie Lee Gardner was shot to death by firing squad in 2010, longtime Utah journalists Pat Reevy
It was the first time I'd seen a firing squad execution.
and Cheryl Worsley
I think I'm changed after seeing something like that.
watched it happen.
But I don't think I'll ever be the same.
When a prisoner is executed in Utah, some of those who witness it are reporters. When Gardner was put to death, Pat, now with KSL.com, was working for the Deseret News.
Ronnie Lee was...
Cheryl, who oversees KSL podcasts, was the news director at KSL News Radio.
You're performing the journalistic act of bearing witness to the execution, but how do you process personally watching someone be put to death?
That's a good question. I don't know that you fully process that.
The Gardner execution attracted a lot of publicity.
There's just more worldwide attention to a firing squad execution.
And it left an impression on those who witnessed it.
We were there probably, I don't know, less than a minute, and it just went boom, boom. It kind of was jarring. It caught me off guard.
Unlike that one, the upcoming execution of Taberon Honie will be carried out by lethal injection. Pat has witnessed one before.
It's less violent, I guess is the best word. It's more like almost a medical procedure where you see a person lying on a gurney with an IV attached to his arm.
You've seen an execution by firing squad. Is it something you would want to personally witness again?
I mean, for the sake of journalism, I would witness it.
I would not volunteer for it, but if it meant a seat was going to go empty, I would do it again, because we have an obligation. When the state conducts someone's death on our behalf, we need to be there to tell how it's done.
Daniel Woodruff.
We're going to interrupt you, Daniel, because we just got the 2-minute warning, which means in 2 minutes they will confirm the execution is completed. Let's go to Andrew inside.
Out. We will provide you with additional details at our press conference when the media witnesses return to this building, which should be in about an hour. Thank you.
Just heard, just barely as we dipped in, that the sentence has been carried out. There's going to be a full update, it sounds like, in about an hour. But again, the sentence has been carried out. That was just the update delivered just barely by corrections officials here in the area where they've been giving all the updates throughout the day.
Okay. Andrew, we appreciate that. It has been completed and carried out. That is confirmed. Daniela, there are some still process and steps that take place after this.
Yes, we know in a special circumstance here, they will be performing a religious ceremony that we'll learn more about later. And then the room will be cleaned. Honie's remains will be transferred to the medical examiner. And then the journalist witnesses who were in there, they will be allowed into the room once it is clean to document that scene. And then this will all culminate in a press conference later where we will hear from the state witnesses who were there, and we'll learn more about exactly how this was carried out, the time of death, and what Honie's last words were.
That's really the remaining thing, is to hear what his final words, if there was anything expressed to the family, to his family. Really the only thing that we don't know at this point.
Certainly.
Okay, well, this wraps up then our coverage and our first execution. All right, let's go back to Daniel out in the free speech zone, because we would like to hear what the reaction is there upon word that the execution has been carried out. Daniel?
Yeah, Deanie, so I haven't heard any announcement made yet, in fact, that it had been carried out. Beside what Andrew reported, nothing here at the free speech zone has been reported yet to people, so it's still quiet and fairly somber as people have been praying this evening and pondering and talking with each other and speaking out against the death penalty and what occurred this evening. So you can see, just as we kind of give you a look at the several dozen people who are still here holding signs and awaiting official word. So that official word has not trickled out here yet, but obviously we heard that announced by corrections officials that the execution of Taberon Honie has been carried out, but word has yet to reach those individuals here. So we'll wait for that. I'm sure reaction will be strong, as a lot of people really upset and troubled by what happened tonight and the carrying out of the death sentence for Taberon Honie. Back to you, Deanie.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. This is a day that has been a long time coming, 25 years since Taberon Honie was commuted to death, and tonight that has been carried out. We will continue to cover this. In an hour, we will get an update, as we reported, from the witnesses, from those who were inside. We will carry that on our KSL Plus app, and we will have all the updates on our KSL Today show in the morning. We'll see you in about an hour.
My name is Glenn Mills. I'm the Director of Communications for the Utah Department of Corrections. We have with us our media witnesses as well. They are Jim Spiewak with KUTV, Sarah Murphy, ABC4, Ben Winslow, Fox 13, Jessica Miller with the Salt Lake Tribune, Kyle Dunphy with Utah News Dispatch, Hannah Schoenbaum with the Associated Press, and Pat Reevy with KSL.com. Also from the Department of Corrections, I have on my right Brian Redd. He is the Executive Director. I have Bart Mortensen, who is the Warden of the Utah State Correctional Facility, and Chief Randall Honie with the Division of Prison Operations. So this press conference will go like this. I will give a brief rundown of the events that took place since we talked last. We will then turn it over to the media witnesses. Ben Winslow will act as chair of the panel. He will make a statement, and then you will be free to ask the other witnesses any questions that you would like. After that, we will hear from Executive Director Redd, and then Warden Mortensen, and then we will take any questions you have following that. At 12:25 a.m., Taberon Dave Honie was pronounced dead. Prior to that, here is what took place. At 12:03, he gave his final statement. Working together with the media witnesses, we put this statement together as this. From the start, it's been, if it needs to be done for them to heal, let's do this. If they tell you you can't change, don't listen to them. To all my brothers and sisters here, continue to change. I love you all. Take care. At 12:04 a.m., lethal injection begins. At 12:13 a.m., a second dose is delivered. At 12:21, the EKG shows a flat line. A sheet is placed over the condemned's head at that point, and then he is pronounced dead at 12:25. We will now hear from Ben Winslow of Fox 13.
So what we observed as we were in the room is when the curtain was drawn, Taberon Honie appeared to be looking up, lifting his head up, laid down. His arms were strapped to the table. He had IVs in both of his arms. The warden read the death warrant to him, and he did then give his final words. His foot appeared to be twitching. We couldn't tell if it was out of nervousness or whether it was just a reaction that was happening. He did continue to look around. He closed his eyes. His foot continued to tap and then stopped. He continued to look around from what we observed. He appeared to be mouthing something to the warden and the director of operations. We could not hear that, whatever it was he said. He lifted his head up again, took a deep exhaling breath, and opened his mouth wide. His breathing appeared to be a little rapid, but it then slowed down very quickly. And then his skin turned pale, turned blue, and we observed the EKG being tested, to measure his pulse again and again and again and again. And as you heard, that was when, shortly afterward, that was when he was pronounced dead and the curtain was drawn for us.
Ben's kind of speaking on behalf of everyone here for us. He's kind of our spokesperson. So yeah, I guess questions.
Do all of you have any questions of the media?
Tell us what it was like seeing that with your own eyes. What's going through your head right now?
I mean, for me, it was, and I said this going in, my hope was that I would watch someone fall asleep and just not wake up. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. It wasn't traumatic in terms of, there was, nothing gory or gruesome about the actual procedure. As Ben mentioned, there was a little bit of a leg twitch early on. I noticed and there was no clocks in there. So our sense of time may be a little off, but it seemed like for me, maybe after the first couple minutes, 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, I didn't see his chest moving. I noticed it right at the beginning. You could see his chest moving, you could see him breathing, and then that kind of stopped. And so, again, the feeling for me was, when is he actually going to die? Didn't know that. And we were watching for about 15-ish or so minutes. But again, his eyes were closed for most of it, or almost all of it, after the first dose was delivered. And for me, it was someone went to sleep and didn't wake up.
Jim, what was it like to sit down in the chair before the curtain was even pulled? What was going through your mind at that point?
Again, just hopefully I watched someone fall asleep and not wake up, and it's nothing more than that.
Was there a sense of nerves or anything?
Yeah, I could feel a little tension. I could feel a little tension. You know, there was really no talking going on amongst anyone in the room, in the witness room. It was very, very quiet. And I think we all kind of realized the gravity of the situation of what was about to happen. And I, quite honestly started to feel a little bit of nervousness, anxious nervousness, not knowing what to expect.
Question for Pat. You were present at the firing squad execution of Ronnie B. Gardner, not present for Taberon Honie's execution. Kind of talk about some of the similarities as you witnessed both of those executions, maybe some differences, just kind of describe.
I don't think there was much similarity at all. I agree that this was far less traumatic. The firing squad execution I thought was much more violent. It's very shake shoot. It's just so loud. And this was really like watching a person fall asleep and not wake up again. So it was a much more, I guess if there's a peaceful way to put someone to death, that's what this was. It took much longer, but as it was mentioned, after like the first minute, it was just watching him, and they kept checking the EKG machine, make sure, see if he still has a pulse. But the firing squad one was much more violent. It was faster, but this was not the same at all.
Kind of describe the emotions you felt before and after each execution. I mean, this being not your first, was this maybe a little easier to process?
For me, it's a hard question to answer, just because I guess I kind of knew what I was getting into before. You're still, the gravity of the situation. You're watching a person die. That's not lost on you. But again, we're there as witnesses for the media, for watchdogs, watching over, make sure things are carried out correctly. And I think you're in kind of work mode. You're not focusing on, oh no, I'm watching a person die. You're focusing on your deadlines, making sure you accurately report everything, and as you're watching everything, it goes off smoothly, I guess.
What were the people carrying out the execution wearing? Did they have ski masks on?
Couldn't see him. Yeah, the IV lines went through the wall. We couldn't see. Yeah.
Just as it's extremely quiet and still in this room when no one's talking, is that what it sounded like for you? Was it just as quiet?
Yeah, that's one of the first things I noticed. And speaking with Ben previously, he mentioned that about the last execution he witnessed. Is we got in the witness room and none of us spoke until after it was over. I want to echo what Jim said about timing. You really have no sense of time in there. It could have been minutes, it could have been much longer. When we found out, it was about 17 minutes. I thought it was longer. We sat in the witness room just in silence for a while until they opened the curtains, and we saw Mr. Honie strapped on the gurney. And I want to mention one thing we discussed is it appeared he had a fairly calm and collected demeanor as he was laying there. But yeah, it was fairly quiet throughout until after it was over.
What was the first word said after the silence in the room? Was action.
I think it's mostly comparing notes.
Sure.
Yeah, we compared our notes for his last words. The final words.
Okay.
Ensuring accuracy.
And we heard the words he said. What did you say about his tone and how he delivered it?
I would say that it was calm and just
Calm
very
and very clear.
Very clear.
It was easy to understand him. And
Were you all aware
no, it's the first we heard of it right now.
we could not, just from our vantage point and observations and being unable to know exactly the nature of the operations that were going on, we could not know when that would be administered. There was no physical reaction that we observed that would indicate a second dose.
The main physical changes we noticed, as previously been mentioned, was he had the white sheet pulled up slightly above his stomach, below his chest, and you could see that rise and fall with every breath, and at some point that eventually stopped, and his right foot that was bouncing, that slowed and stopped as well at some point.
I did write down in my notes, just saw fluid moving through one tube, thought maybe about roughly 10 plus minutes in. Wasn't sure if it was saline. I heard them say earlier maybe saline might be going through. So I did write that down in my notes, but at the time I didn't know if that was another dose or what. But there was no movement from him when that second dose, or if that was the second dose when it went through, there was no movement. No movement at all.
Just down on this end, what stood out to you most, or maybe was most surprising about what you read this?
I mean, the whole experience was sort of surreal. I mean, just watching, I guess it's, I guess I kind of expected something more dramatic to happen. And I think that's sort of the absence of that is what stuck out to me. It's a pretty intense situation, but I'd say just sort of overall just somewhat bizarre and seemed like it went pretty seamless.
It seemed seamless, but it seemed like, again, we lost track of time. It really seemed like a long time. I also saw the previous lethal injection execution, and I didn't remember it taking that long. That's not to say one way is better than the other, it's just that it really seemed like it took a very long time for this to happen.
Question's really for anybody. All of you didn't know how long this took place, didn't know there was a second dose administered until right now. Do you feel like that should be part of the process where you should know key points as they're going on as a witness? Or do you feel like it should be a complete blank slate, having just done this? Would that help you through the process? Would you like to have the comms in your ear that says pushing a dose, for example, pushing a second?
I think the one thing that we all discussed that would be really helpful is having a clock in our facility. Otherwise, I think it was pretty well communicated and having people in the room with us to answer immediate questions so that we can get the process smoothly for all of us. I think just knowing that we all were there, able to compare what we saw with others.
Just a show of hands, how many have witnessed more than one execution in Utah? 2. And then for all of you, would any of you be willing to do this again?
How long did it take you guys to piece together this final work? So you guys kind of worked together to
Well, we were all taking notes, individual notes about what was said, and so it was just more of comparing what we heard to ensure that it was accurate. So,
As far as the time, less than 5 minutes.
yeah, just
Did you find that I mean, only to give some context to my question, it seems like a person's last words is something that you want to make sure you get right. That's
Yes.
something that you very much do. It seems, would it have been helpful to kind of go through your question to have that
I personally felt like between the 7, including Glenn, 8 of us, it was simple enough. Some of us got the beginning, some of us got the middle, some of us got the end, and I also feel like that's part of the reason we're there, is for us to be the ones to listen and write down and listen to that tone of voice. So I felt like between the 7 of us, it was fairly simple.
I mean, would I like a recording to ensure accuracy? Absolutely, but I work with what I have, and this is the circumstances we're placed under, and so we do the best that we can.
And he spoke fast.
Mm-hmm.
He spoke very fast. So we were all jotting down quickly.
Any other questions? All right, we appreciate all of you.
Anybody ask questions?
Yeah, we will. Okay, we'll have a few statements, and then we will turn it over to questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would probably go ahead and go out.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, once again, we will first hear from Executive Director Brian Redd. He will have a statement. Following Executive Director Redd, we will hear from Warden Bart Mortensen. And then Ben mentioned how in the witness room we saw Mr. Honie mouth some words and lift up and look, and Chief Honie will explain what that was all about.
So today our department fulfilled one of the most consequential responsibilities given to the Department of Corrections. No one involved today, takes joy in carrying out this responsibility, but we recognize it as one of our statutory duties, and we take it seriously. Preparation for this situation started months ago, and it required hours and hours of work. You may already be aware of this, but around 200 individuals were involved in this tonight. Just in this situation, that doesn't include all of the additional staff that were required to keep the normal prison operations maintained. We want to thank our partners, our allied agencies, including the Department of Public Safety and the Salt Lake City Police Department for their help, and there were others. We thank them for their support. Our team worked through this process and the complexities in a very conscientious and dedicated manner. This is a significant event, and I watched our staff fulfill these responsibilities in a respectful, professional, and dignified manner, and I thank them for that. They did an amazing job. We are providing support to our staff, including mental health support or whatever they need for those that were involved or any of our staff members that may need it. We want to thank all of you for being here and covering this today, and appreciate all that you've done in bringing the transparency and accountability for this event. Thank you.
Thank you. To provide a brief rundown of facility operations throughout today and the next few days, at 6 a.m. this morning, the facility was on lockdown with the exception of a few incarcerated individual workers. With the workers, they provided hot meals and provided hot breakfast and hot lunch, and then we provided a cold dinner for the evening. Throughout the day, all essential medical and legal services took place. And also, yesterday, I guess, the facility continued intakes of newly incarcerated individuals. We wanted to avoid disrupting the schedules of our allied agencies. At about 4 p.m. yesterday afternoon, we asked all staff who weren't providing an essential function to either the execution or the facility ops to end their workday and go home. And by 6:30 p.m., the only staff left on the facility were those that were on the master pass list. We expect by 6 a.m. this morning, the facility will resume normal operations. And over the upcoming days, we've collaborated with our clinical health services partners to provide mental health services for the incarcerated individuals. And we've also collaborated closely with our release and reentry division to increase case management exposure to the inmates so that they can help where needed. Thank you.
I'll speak to Mr. Winslow's question about Mr. Honie mouthing something. So he was actually speaking to the warden and myself, and he simply stated, "Thank you for taking care of my family." And then he raised up his head and looked over to where his family was viewing it and just said, "I love you."
It was also reported from the family's witness room that his mother also said, "I love you, son," back.
Can I ask, what was the decision to issue a second dose of pentobarbital? Was that a decision made on the fly as a result of him? Was there an issue, or was this always planned?
It was made ahead of time at the doctor's recommendation. Initially, the plan was to push a second dose at 20 minutes. Because the second dose was prepared and could not be used again, the doctor made the recommendation just to move that up to 5 minutes.
Was that because he wasn't responding to it?
No, it appeared that he was responding fine. It was just because the doctor recommended it and the dose was already basically used, and so he just moved it up.
Can you discuss now the ceremony that happened after you announced that?
So Mr. Honie's father and his cousin just wanted to come in. According to their beliefs, the soul after the death can potentially get trapped where it place of death, and so they performed their ceremony to release the soul so he could return back to the visa. It simply just involved a few bird feathers and some cornmeal and laying a path for the soul to leave the room. It was very quick, very simple.
And you said that afterwards possibly you would say who the victim's family witness?
Yeah. Karen, can you send me that document? I'll work on that, and then if you have any other questions, we'll answer those.
I noticed, if I counted correctly, you checked the EKG, it looked about 5 times. Is that the average? Is that normal to check that many times?
So the EKG machine we used, the screen times out after 3 minutes. It's still running. It was Bluetooth back to the medical doctor behind the wall. So it was constantly running. I was just turning the screen back on to ensure that no leads had fallen off and it was still running properly.
From the outside, it seems like everything went pretty smoothly. Was there anything that you noticed internally that may have slowed a process somewhere or involved some different movement than you had planned for this whole process?
No, we've been planning this for a long time. It took many different people working on many different parts, and it went according to plan, and we're grateful for that.
I will say, however, we still will have internal debriefings to go over everything and check everything to make sure everything went the way it should have and could have. Back to the witnesses, which ones were you asking about? So we had, for the victim witnesses, there were 7.
Not all showed up, but I don't know who's missing. I don't know which name.
Okay, I'm just going to give you the names of those that were expected. Trevia Wall, Betsy China, Sarah China, Benita Racheta, that's with a Y, Y-R-A-C-H-E-T-A, Isaac Racheta, Dakota Rogers, and Tony Rogers. Any other witnesses you're interested in? Sure. So for the condemned, we had Franklin Honie Sr. How do you pronounce the mom's name, Becky? Teresita Honie, Sherwin Leslie, Teresa Honie, and then Therese Day. We know the media witnesses. For government, we had Senator Darren Owens, Senator Mike Kennedy, House Speaker Mike Schultz, Scott Burns, Iron County District Attorney, Chad Dotson, Iron County Attorney, Sheriff Ken Carpenter, Iron County, Chief Darren Adams, Cedar City Police, Justin Anderson, who is the Utah Attorney General representative for our office, and John Pierpont, the Governor's Chief of Staff, and Representative Casey Snyder.
Can I make one correction? Scott Burns is the Paiute County Attorney, but was the original prosecutor on the case.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question. Is it possible that the witnesses for the victim cross paths, or do you guys take procedures to make sure that they are kept separate?
Yes, we took procedures and plans so they would never cross paths. They were temporarily placed in a holding area and then driven to the chamber separately, and then they never crossed paths.
When you say there's this discussion in the media room, his foot, his right foot,
Yes.
in the air. So was that just nervousness, or did he have music going on in his head?
No, to me it was nerves. He was nervous going in there. I mean, rightfully so, and to me it appeared to be nerves the whole time.
Can you talk a little bit about the process of inserting the type of line? Just getting in trouble finding a pain, questioning how long did that take, and
It went very smoothly. One poke in each arm, they were able to find a vein right away. He actually said it was painless for him, and IV team did a great job.
And he was compliant, getting onto the table and everything like that?
100% compliant, no issues.
Legs actually strapped?
Yes, sir. His legs were strapped at the ankles and right below the knees, and then on the thighs as well.
Could you speak on his morale? The last we heard from you at 10:30, between then and the time he was on the green. His final energy, what was he like?
He was very calm. It appeared, I don't know if you would say ready, but he appeared to have accepted it. He was just more or less having thoughts to himself and just kind of gathering all that. He was quiet, didn't talk a lot. But
And did he listen to music that entire time up until you took him?
yes, ma'am.
Did he walk into there on his own power?
Yes, sir. Yes, he walked in on his own power and was able to get up on the table on his own and was, again, compliant.
Did he say anything prior to the final prepared or statement that was actually shared with us?
He asked which room his family was in. He asked that he wanted to know so he could, I assume, say I love you. And then he also asked if he could have his glasses on so he could visually see. And so we granted that request to have his glasses on so he could.
Since historically there have been issues during the part of the process where the IV is being inserted, should Department of Corrections look into amending the policy to where that is transparent for witnesses as well? Because that happened, it's my understanding that happened out of the view of witnesses. In reading up on botched executions, we know that sometimes there are issues with that process, and so I'm curious as to why that happened
part of the reason, and we could always explore something in the future, but part of the reason is just so that the witnesses, particularly maybe his family, doesn't have to see all of that activity occurring and causing that type of traumatic experience.
And I'll just say in addition to that, we are bound by law to protect the identity of the IV team. So that's an important part of that as well.
The media witnesses were asked how we felt watching a person die. Obviously, it's part of our job to be a witness. Would you be willing to share how you feel after this event? I know you mentioned that this is a heavy event. It is part of your duty, part of your job. Would any of you be willing to share how you're feeling right now?
Well, a lot of it is we need to, check our feelings at the door. This is a responsibility that we have as a Department of Corrections. We know when we come into these roles that this is something we may have to do. Obviously, human life is important to all of us, and so it's impactful. But we try to check those things at the door and do our responsibility professionally so that it can be done, as well as possible.
Any other questions?
What important things should we know, like what happens from here? I know Mr. Honie's body's with the medical examiner. I assume just kind of talk about is there anything else we should know what happens next?
So as far as that's concerned, I would have to refer you to the ME if you want information on that.
In the next day or so, we will be doing a debrief as a department. While this went off very smoothly, there's always things that we can learn and try to improve on, I'm sure. So we'll be doing that as a department. We'll be checking on our team members who were involved or anyone in our staff to make sure that they're good, that they have the support that they need. We will also have to report back to the court as it's required to do so, and so we'll be reporting back to the court as well. So there are a few more things that we'll be doing.
Glenn, you mentioned that clearly there's been a lot of research into using pentobarbital. Compared to your research, did everything go as planned as far as timelines? Was this the length you were expecting things to take?
Yes, it is.